Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Identity Podcast. As always, every single Wednesday at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time, we premiere a episode for the Identity Podcast. And we're so grateful to be here, as always. Of course, I am Caleb, one of your co-hosts, and with my fellow and lovely co-host, Tarik. It is just a wonderful time as we welcome none other than Justin Connor for the silver screen right here. The actor, the filmmaker, the director, just an incredible person. We're so grateful to have on the show, and so we're very very excited to welcome him. Of course, don't forget the Identity Podcast is presented to you by Find Your ID NYC. And don't forget to go ahead and check them out on all social media platforms, and check out the Identity Podcast on all streaming platforms and on all social media platforms. Of course, if you love the Identity Podcast and want to sponsor us, well, guess what? You can. Email us at press@findyourdnyc.com, and we'll get back to you with more details from there. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon page and our Discord page, all at the Identity Podcast. Well, again, welcome, Justin, to the show. We're so grateful to have you. We can't wait to start beginning and discussing everything for your show. So how are you?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Apologize for the noise there.
All right.
Well, here we are. So, of course, just as we kind of begin, and again, thank you for coming on to the show and everything. We're so grateful to have you. But let's start off with your journey, kind of where you've come from and where you've been able to lead today.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up back east, just outside of Boston, and went to college out here in California, and was leaning on going to law school, and ended up deciding to pursue a career in acting. So came out to Hollywood and started doing that for a while, and then started getting into music and released an album, and figured what I was going to do on the next project, and always wanted to direct and write something. And felt like some of the story of my own past felt like a good story to share as a feature film. So started writing that in conjunction with the next album, and tried to see if I could pull off making kind of a musical rockumentary about a musician who was kind of fallen out of the limelight and confronting some of his chaotic past to make room for his devotional future. So that's kind of how the Golden Age came about.
What a beautiful summation. I don't even know if the trailer got it that succinct. Yeah, guys, definitely check out all of our viewers. I'm happy to see you guys. I hope you made it safe. Everything's been great with you guys. Definitely check out his documentary. It definitely sheds light on a lot of parts of his life. But as we delve deeper into this, I'm just curious, man, have you always been this retrospective? Like, even in your journey, have you been like looking back and always in soul search? I know like there was one particular point in your life that it was just like, all right, we're soul searching. There's something else going on that I need to figure out about myself. But have you always been very introspective, even as a child? Or
yeah, I guess so. I think where it emanated from more than most. I think a lot of actors or a lot of artists in general have, some kind of fractured past a little bit that they're kind of trying to repiece together by creating or so I think it was an element of wanting to not only transparently reveal some of my own wounds as surviving some of, I grew up with an alcoholic father, and it was pretty challenging. It was a little abusive physically, emotionally. And so I think it was more about wanting to tell a story of survival, given that, there's so many people out there that are starting to become more cognizant of the effects of that and being more transparent about trying to heal from it. So I think it was less retrospective and more, I was finding difficulty moving forward in sort of a peaceful light if I hadn't addressed some of these things. So, in Hollywood, you go on these shows and it's fun as an actor to like, play these dramatic roles or somebody with a gun or a love story and all that. And that there's nothing wrong with that. It's all beautiful. But I felt that I needed to address some of my own story. And I think part of the reason of wanting to direct was telling a story of more substance, or telling a story that was maybe even more related to so many people's plight and path. So I felt like I needed to address this in order to move on in my own life, as well as seeing so many people I knew that had been through the same, that maybe weren't as crazy to take on a film and do the same for their own. I'm finding it healing a lot of people that have been through the same, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. I mean, just with my own troubled past, I understand what it means to be an artist. It's almost like we are finding ways to communicate with humanity in a way that's, I guess, artistic in a sense, and creative. But what I was going to say was, has your music changed since you've been able to do this? Also, a big question: was music always a therapy for you before you were able to use your acting outlet as a therapy?
That's funny because as a kid, I played music a little bit on piano, but it was funny. Like, I didn't really start playing music again until I came to LA, and it was like there was a lot of downtime between auditions. So I'm like, I bought a piano and just started picking it up again. So it was kind of like it was almost like there were so many impediments to getting out or to being, there's a lot of downtime between auditions and acting gigs. So I just kind of picked it up, and then I released this first album I wrote called Kelly, and music is just so fun 'cause it's so autonomous, you're not waiting on someone else. So it kind of happened by mistake, really. And then when it was coming time to make the second album, and I started trying to figure out how I could piece this together with the script. I tried to think, is there a way to sing songs that help tell the story, like a pivotal scene, and sing them, but not lip sync them? And that was, you know, one of the rules of this film is everything you see in it is live. So I wanted the songs to help tell the story if it was like a pivotal scene between, actors and such. And so now it's, my friends who know me are like, gosh, keep doing music, screw this acting thing. And part of me is like, well, I love acting. So I don't know where I'm headed next, but music is so freeing because it's sort of like how we all communicate. And I think it has potential to really like unearth a lot of healing and a lot of like collective vibration just by like, digging into a tune that tries to dip into that whole collective consciousness of not only our own wounds or what we're struggling with, kind of the madness of this age. So, it's definitely become part of my directive that I don't think I'll ever let go of it, but it kind of happened by mistake in some strange way.
Yeah, that's funny. It's almost do it live. That's kind of like, you do all this transcendental meditation, and it's just like, do it live. You're like, well, I could have got that from Nike, right? But I really do see that as something to see. It's very human. That's what I was going to talk about as far as the film. Your music, it has a lot of breath to it. It doesn't seem mechanical. It doesn't seem like a score. I was actually talking to Caleb about this. I was like, it's interesting. When you're scoring something, it's not the same as writing an album. I mean, it's kind of the same, or?
Yeah, definitely. And I don't think it matters what medium on some level. When you're an artist, it doesn't matter whether you're painting or acting or doing music. For me, it's like that was the vehicle for this one. But I guess I had to write it as an album first and foremost, but then I had to write it as an album that fit in context of telling the story within the film. And I did still score the film as well. So there's like a score to it, but it was like the songs had to be their own album in itself on its own right, but at the same time help tell the story. And I had to perform them in the film live, which was hard. And I had to portray that I was like this pop star who fell out of the limelight. So it was like there was a lot of pressure actually to not only know where I was in the film while I was singing them, but also convey or suspend the disbelief that I was, this guy Maya O'Malley, which is sort of like like a dissertation on fame. I feel, a lot of people think like, oh, there's a documentary or a rockumentary. How much of this of your life is real versus fake? And, for me, it's sort of like, I look at the golden age like a comedy, but it's like but not for laughs. It's sort of a satire on like pop stars and fame and people trying to put together their fractured past and going through their drug phases and trying to put the pieces back together. So if, there's an element of, I think for a while I was craving this like adulation as most artists do, but then I think on some level I was kind of hedging my bets to do like kind of a long, slow, steady, playing the long game with fame a little bit in terms of, because I've seen so many people that have had a lot of success and had looked like they're going equally as crazy as those that were craving the very thing that they were trying to attain.
Mm-hmm.
So I just kind of wanted to keep it all in perspective and say that it doesn't matter where you are or where you hope to be, that sometimes the madness of this age is inescapable. So I wanted to kind of have a little bit of a satirical laugh, wink, wink with the audience about fame and even our own wounds. You know, I mean, it's kind of a mirage when we look at all these things that we go through. It seems like, oh, these perceived oppressors are knocking us down. But sometimes that pain and that getting set back or getting smashed a little bit is really sometimes our greatest benediction. So I was trying to celebrate that, but at the same time, walking that fine line between satire, but also not trying to take it with any kind of comedic lightheartedness. I really wanted to play it as real as possible because these wounds were real. And I know survivors of this madness are always struggling with these things. I don't think they ever go away. So I wanted to treat them with kid gloves and be very present with them as well. So, yeah, I think that's kind of where it came about.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's really wonderful, and especially for all those that have maybe not expressed, that probably watch our show and that are just listening to Justin, that may listen to this in the future. You know, just that we are here. You know, as artists, we're all here for each other in that sense. But isn't it so ironic that as entertainers, we play this make-believe world with such realistic things, you know, that we're dealing with. And I think you've it's almost like the human experience is this play that we're in, and part of it is tragedy, part of it has this melancholy and all these things that we kind of go through on a daily basis. So I thought that was very interesting. And I do feel like, you know, taking the air out of the idea of a pop star or like some sort of celebrity and taking the seriousness of it, the severity of certain things out of it does bring that satire, because it's someone's livelihood if they get cast in a role, whether it's comedy or whatever it is. It's like their whole life is changed by these roles. And I was an actor for a bit at the time, and I know what it's like. That downtime it can be brutal if you're not occupying your time with something that's sustainable, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, you know, Caleb and I were talking about this earlier, you know, the irony at the Identity podcast, but, you know, this whole idea of identity is, it's like, you know, it's just so funny to me, like you mentioned about a stage play, like the whole thing is like a stage play, like we're our parents' sons, and then we have lovers and friends, and it's like this grand stage play. Maybe there was an element of wanting to make this film that blurred the line between fiction and reality a little bit, because I kind of got dismayed or wasn't fed enough when I was just doing acting. It's like, it's fun to stand on a piece of tape and work with another actor and try to get really real with someone else's words. And I know it's like one of the most beautiful like forms of creativity, in terms of when you're really transcending a moment, that it almost supersedes whatever we conjure or think reality is in and of itself. So I don't want to like poo-poo it in any sense, but there was an element that I wanted to go a little bit deeper, because there's like I think there's a gray area now, since we all know what's real and what's fake in a different context now that everyone's got these cameras and phones, that I wanted to do something of substance that kind of had a poking fun at this mirage of playing pretend. And I think maybe that's a little bit of an element of why I've gravitated more towards music than stepped away from acting a little bit, because it is such pretend, you know. And it's funny how we revel in society, these people that play pretend really well. And at the same time, I champion that skill set, because it's not easy to do that when there's a bunch of lights and you got to knock it out. And I've been in the same position, but if I didn't do something of a substantive nature that helped to heal myself and help others in a collective light, it just kind of felt empty after a while. So I think it's important to see the grand like mirage of our own identity, and even film in itself. It's like, it's almost like the whole thing is a big lie. You know, I can't remember who said the quote, but it was something like, art is the exaggeration of the truth, you know. So it's like we're all playing with this idea of, you get lost in the film, you believe it, but it's like, oh, I saw that person in that film. You know, it's like you kind of like are going along for the ride, but it's not real enough for me sometimes. So I almost think like it would be more interesting to see people like do, or if they're crazy enough to do like a, you know, 10-year project like this, and really tell their story, so you can really get into the meat and potatoes of like how real it is and for their story, versus like how well they can play pretend and you hopefully disappear within it, you know, because it all seems like a funny stage play, this whole material life.
Yeah, right. I agree, man. I agree. So I guess what I was gonna say was just to ask you, man, like what kind of inspired you to realize that pain was there, I guess. If I could, like, was there any triggers? Was it just the apathy that you were experiencing that you kind of just described, or what kind of got you to even start writing?
Well, I think sometimes these wounds or these traumas catch up with you later in life, even though you know how deeply they hit you along the way. And for me, it was like I just felt like it was like a really crazy youth. Like, I'm not really sure I'm sitting before you, like, to be honest with you, like, alive. Like, it was wild. And I only could get into it into a brief kind of outline-esque way in the film. Whereas with the book, I get a little bit more honest with it, but it lasted for years, if not decades. And so as a kid, that has an imprint on you. And I just had to really get honest with it. And I think what happened, how it all started, was I knew that this stuff was percolating. And I remember seeing some Super 8 films of me as a child that my mom had shared with me before she passed away. And I was like, oh, this could have the inklings of, you know, what happens to us when we're like those innocent kids to where we are now, and how do we bury some of those wounds or come to terms with them. So it was very tough, and it's been tough since I released it, because I had, you're constantly swimming in these circles of old trauma. But I just had to confront that beast, because I felt like if I hadn't, a lot of my life and relationships and such, it would have just been like spiraling. The fact that I was still wounded by the stuff and I didn't come to terms with it in a more like a healthy sense. So I know that, I met a lot of people. It was crazy about when I released it. A lot of people come up to me or have hit me up on social media or emails or whatever and said, oh my God, I had a very similar youth, or my dad left when I was 4 and I haven't been able to stay in relationships my whole life. And it's been really good to see how it's affected other people's tumultuous past without it getting in the way of their own story, but allowing them to heal their own story through the golden age. So I think the more we get transparent about how fragile we are from these topsy-turvy lives which many of us have had, it allows us to have a more honest conversation with ourselves, so they're not as plagued by them, or they're not as heavy. Even if they never go away, we just sort of learn to develop a different relationship with them. So I think that was part of it for me.
Yeah, I thought it was brilliant. I think that's a great way to respond to it, man. I hope we don't bury it, because sometimes, like you said, it can unearth in a very different way. And I don't mean to ever trick you by bringing back that, but that's kind of where my question was, is at least for our artists that are interested in kind of transcending either whatever art form they're in right now, or even just thinking about telling their story in some sort of written path. I'm curious to see, like, are you interested in ever, like, watching your film again, or is it kind of like that scene from Minority Report when he's just like, no, he's just like scrolling
Right.
the scenes again? I'm curious, is it, once you develop a better relationship, have you been able to see it with a more adult light? I think one of our earlier guests mentioned this about children. She's a life coach, and she mentioned that children see things in absolutes. And I think that's kind of what we experience when we have traumas that are so early. You said it brings the structure of the mother, father, all these things that are like, okay, this is what this should be. You're just funny, like kind of becoming tangible to life, and you find understanding what this feels like in this. And as you're doing that, and you're coming to all things that are solid, you realize that there's a gray area that is life. So I'm curious, like, have you been able to revisit it? Do you watch it often, or?
I don't watch it just because after you cut a film,
my own works. So I'm just curious. Yeah.
Not just that, I think, like, after I really worked on the editing process to make sure, like, everything, just frames, like, just to make sure. One of you said, or like, there was a lot of breath in the film, or like went at a certain pace. And I think, like, in this generation, everything's so fast, like even commercials or social media stuff, or even feature films now are cut so quick. And it's like, there's an element of the films that I grew up idolizing, and the filmmakers, they kind of like cut their films at a pace that fit them, even if no one else understood it. So I don't really revisit it because I've watched it so many times, and I'm sure I probably will, like, I don't know, down the road. But and maybe that's part and parcel because I've been working on the book a lot, which goes a lot deeper. Because one thing I realized with the film is you can only really speak in broad strokes. So I was able to tell the story, but I couldn't really get deep into it in the way you can in 100 minutes versus like 200 or 300 page book. So yeah, I think for others that are, maybe look to express something that's of a personal light, I think that's kind of where we're headed, just because everything seems so disposable now that in a feature film length or even social media, is everything that we're entertaining ourselves with, music. It's like the themes and the tones and the substance of what's being talked about seems to be lacking of a certain substance. So I think whoever is looking to do something of a similar light, or for myself on this, I wanted to just be really honest and present and not be afraid to trust myself. And I think that's one of the things that comes up when we've survived trauma, is that inability to trust ourselves. So, I really, like there was one scene in the film, and for those who've seen it, I won't ruin it for you, but there's a scene where I'm talking in the kitchen about a situation I have with my father and a drunk driving episode, and people who watch it were like, dude, it's like a 7-8 minute scene, you can't just leave it in there. I'm like, no, we got to leave it in there as one take, because you never see something that's unfiltered, that's not cut away from. And it's like if Maya wins you over after the scene, you're going with them for the ride for the rest of the film. A lot of people are like, no, do jump cuts and make it shorter and make it like 2 minutes. I'm like, no, dude, I don't want to do that shit, because I want to make it really real. Whereas everything's so fast now, it's like, I think the fun thing about filmmaking and editing, and maybe why I haven't watched it in a while, is it really slows you down. Not to like, manipulate the audience by any stretch of the imagination, but everything's moving so fast now. All these, and God bless you guys at the podcast, and like so many podcasts and like social media and like the news and YouTube. And sometimes I just can't keep up with it. By the time 5 p.m. rolls around, I'm like, Jesus Christ, what the hell just happened? But I wanted to slow it down, because that pace allows us to like slow our breath down and slow our thoughts down and really take something in that needs to be told in a certain tempo, instead of just rushing to get it out there so they don't go to the next thing. So for me, it was a lot about tone. And so I haven't watched it in a while, because I know when I watch it, it's going to slow me down to really get involved with it. And I think that's what people have related to on some level with the film, is it's at a different pace than a lot of media that we see these days. And that in itself can be confronting, because you're asking them to go along with you to drive to the store at 10 miles per hour instead of like rushing there at 35, So.
I actually, I really felt like I was kind of able to resonate throughout times of this film. And I'm sure that there are others as well. And I know you kind of touched on it, Justin. As someone who also had not really a father figure in my life for a long time, it definitely, there were moments where I couldn't relate to you, but there were moments where I could relate to you. And I could relate to not having that figure, not having that role model, or having bad memories of different things as well. And something I will say, that scene specifically, in the kitchen scene, that was the scene the first time around that really hooked me. That was the scene that really was like, okay, now this is really something, because I recognized that, I could watch a similar film to this, but that scene may be cut differently, right? Or maybe scripted differently. Maybe it's more along the lines to where you are just, Justin, you went for it, right? And Mile O'Malley is going for it, and he is speaking what exactly happened, while an actor, another actor may refrain, right?
Yeah,
or maybe the script only shows so much.
Or portray it, or like act it out. And it's funny that you mentioned this, because that scene switches tone so deeply, because up to that point, it's like, oh, we're watching a documentary, and it's like, oh, some stuff's going on with him.
Yep.
This guy's been through the ringer. But now it's like, okay, we're going to pull, guns blazing now, in terms of like, we're going to get really real and raw. in a way that's uncomfortable for me in the scene as well as for the audience. And people think like, oh, well, this happened to you, so you're just telling your story. I'm like, well, it's a little different than that. You got a camera in your face, you got lights. And to be honest with you, I scripted that as if I were like an actor on a narrative film, because even though I had been through that story with my dad, and it was the first time I ever told anyone about it, and I was doing it on film, and I did it in one take, I still had to write it out. And well, the way I wrote it out was to the T of how I performed it, but it was like staying in that gray area because this couldn't be performed me. So I think a lot of this film for me, and the films that really I respond to now, and I think this is where I hope filmmaking goes, but who knows, because it's like almost a different form of acting style where it's like a beingness that transcends portrayal or performance, while at the same time blurs the line between like, is this real or what? Because, and you know, a lot of people see it are like, well, you're just telling your story about what happened with your dad. I'm like, no, dude, I scripted this out, the ... the pauses, the this, because I knew that this had to sell. So I was like working on it for weeks, that monologue, because I was like, I want to sell this by not selling what I wrote, by selling it by like, this is the most truthful thing I can say about my past that fits within the narrative of this story. And how real I get with it almost determines how real I can get with the audience and how real I can heal from my own life. So I think there's like a gray area now where like performance and beingness. And that's why that was like a very tough scene for me to do. Cause you know, I'm not one of these people that like, hey, I want to tell my story and show how wounded I am. But there's a certain point in life where it's like, if these are coming up for you, they're gonna come out in the way they need to. And I had to get really honest with it. And something you said about like your dad and you've been through some similar pain, I was thinking about the other night when I was taking a walk. It's like some people have been through like outright neglect where like parents just like didn't want anything to do with them and they're affected by that in some regard. But even if you've been through like some massive amounts of physical and emotional abuse, which I have, there's still that aspect of neglect, because even though you went through it, it was very viscerally in your face, you still feel neglected as a result of it. So I think one of the things that I really wanted to convey with this film was that shame comes up a lot around these surviving coping mechanisms of like having to go through trauma, and how we deal with that shame is really being cognizant and present with ourselves about, it's okay, I went through this, I survived it, you know, and like really being like a cheerleader to ourselves, because like I said earlier, I don't think these wounds ever really go away. It's just like we learn how to develop a different relationship with them. So I wanted to like reflectively say, I'm broken in a million pieces from this, but I'm willing to be really honest about it to the best I can within whatever talents I have as an actor, musician, in the hopes that A, I can heal from it, and B, reflectively, other people who've been through the same can take a peek at their own and see, maybe it's time for me to address this and like, you know, let go of what needs to be let go of, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like how you worded that, especially right at the end, and kind of how you described your definition of shame and kind of how it means to you, and how you try to portray that in film and try to put the film out there and everything with this kind of definition, this realization, this form of shame. And I definitely feel that throughout the film, The Golden Age, which of course, plug, check it out on Amazon Prime. It's one of those films where really, for me, it took me a little bit, right? You have to, it's not, as you said, you know, it takes a little bit to get into it. It's not necessarily something where it's like the first 5 minutes I'm hooked. Instead, you really have to watch it and you have to listen. And I feel like, to be honest, I feel like that is one of the beauties of art, is to be able to really kind of carry the listener, carry the viewer on a ride, right? You know for a fact you're not going to get them hooked right away, but you're not going to deter them right away either, right? You're going to kind of lead them into something, and then you bring them in. And there's a few scenes there closer to the beginning of the film that I think are really important for kind of what happens. I think the first death that's kind of reflected upon in the movie, I'm forgetting her name, the character, but the fellow musician.
Yeah, Jen.
Yes.
down. Sometimes a death from somebody triggers like our own wounds. So that was like the beginning of the
Exactly.
second act. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
And
it's funny.
that's something.
Yeah. Keep going.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no. I'm totally with you on this. And, I know. And one thing while you're saying that I was thinking of is, on the other side of it, in regards to this, like sometimes we don't realize like these triggers will help foster a trigger of my story got triggered or him falling out of the limelight because of something random, like a friend passing away. And that's how it happens. But the hardest part of this whole project, really, that we haven't got into, which is fine, is like the music. Like I was trying to write like the greatest singer-songwriter album of all time. And I don't say that in like, oh, look at me, like look at my talents, but it was like I had to like sell that I was one of the biggest dudes in the game. And I was talking about songs that weren't like really apropos with like what's happening in pop music these days. So I really had to trust that like, oh, I'm going to dig back into my heroes of like Beatles and all that. And I'm going to tell a substance story about a guy that's at a crossroads in his life. And I had to pull that off. That was hard to do. So like the songs in and of themselves were like a whole journey even beyond the film. And then filming the songs in it in relation to where I was in the film. And they had to like you had to be as into what he was doing in front of the camera, but you also had to be into what was coming out of his mouth with these songs. And that was hard because I wasn't sure if this was going to play or people were going to buy it, because this is like people aren't singing about these themes in 2020, but, and I'm glad, but, I took like a risk in that regard, but I really had to trust, like, people need to hear this. I need to hear this. Maybe this is why we're falling apart and so consumed with being known or famous or not willing to look at our own selves. It's like, let's try to look at a greater context of this funny play of life, or what does it mean to go on our devotional path, or what does it mean to heal from this or forgive our perceived oppressors? Or so, I had to like somehow like convince people I was this pop star thing, which was kind of fun or funny. But yeah, man, I just tried to be as present as possible with it. I think when you've I think when you've survived this stuff, or when most artists have gone through some like hellacious things in their lives, and that's what makes their art or what they create present or different than the next. And the main thing with this whole thing was like, don't portray anything. Don't feel like you need to convince anyone of anything. Just be as real, as honest, and as transparent. Even if that means you have to show how broken you are, your wounds in front of the camera in a way that's completely uncomfortable and you may cringe after. It's like, just be honest, like take one for the team, because there's a lot of people out there that are suffering in the same light that don't have the guts, understandably, because of that shame and feeling of lack of self-worth of going through this for so many years. I said, well, I think that's why I created this like alter ego, my O'Malley, because in my own life, I'm not like him. He's a lot braver than I am. So, you see a lot of artists do it with like Ziggy Stardust or Lady Gaga, and people like create like these alter egos to like allow themselves the freedom to really step through any fear or lack of self-worth that maybe they've gone through in different trials and tribulations in their life. So I kind of used him as a vehicle to say, I'm gonna heal hell or high water, and hopefully other people that need to as well can go along for the ride if I pull it off. So I didn't know if it was going to work. A lot of this was very experimental.
I so kind of based off of that, what you just said, do you feel like you may revisit a character, or maybe even similar to, or maybe even Maya himself? Do you ever feel like you may revisit him?
Yes. Yes, actually, if I'm absurd enough to do another film, and one thing that's funny is by the time I finish this, like music, everything is streaming. So it's been hard finding my audience with the golden age, because there's so much stuff out there, and I released it during COVID and not many people probably knew about it. I've done, sponsored marketing ads and trying to find people to get it. And I really stand behind it. I think it will move and change the culture when it gets under, their skin. And it may take a while. But I believe in it, and I'm just kind of taking it one step at a time. But if I make another film again, I'm thinking about kind of taking my O'Malley in a different direction, but making even more of like an offering to my gurus from the East, or more about like, even like now that he's healed a little bit, you know, I can dip back into some of those old storylines, but now we're kind of moving in a different context to see, like, zooming out, now taking the wider angle of like what it means to be like a soul moving through this earth, and what it means to kind of maybe inspire the next generation of potential pitfalls that they can avoid in the way that, you know, I've had to walk through the fire of a little bit. So the problem with making a film is just, it's so much work and it's so much time and money. And in this day and age, it seems like everyone's so absorbed with their own stuff or social media that I'm not sure if people have the attention span to slow down and watch it. And I hope they will, because I think independent film, especially when you're working in like more substantive themes like this, or a theme that's cathartic in some regard that we're all kind of going through. And that's why I think it's so important for people to see it, because we've all been through our own wounds. Nobody gets out of here alive or hasn't had to walk through some fire. But I hope that it resonates with people in that regard, because and I'll do another one if I'm crazy enough to do one, but it just takes so much energy. And I hope that people will make room for these kind of stories, even though we're living in an age of distraction, because I think film has the power and potential far more than any other art form, because it hits so many different senses. You know, you're dealing with a 3-act structure story. There's the lighting, there's the camera angles, there's the acting or performance, there's music. You know, it's like there's so many intangibles that you can't really encapsulate with like a song or an album or a podcast or on stage in a play. You know, it's like, it's just different. So we'll see what happens. It's a lot of work. So if my O'Malley shows up again, I'll let you know. But I'm still, it's in the germination, like gestation stage.
Yeah, I do agree with you. You know, film is one of those beautiful art forms that is unlike anything else, right? And I feel like your depiction of My O'Malley is great, because I, as a fan, a major fan of music, you know, I work in radio and everything, constantly involved with music. And as a musician myself, someone who is a nerd as well and loves to watch different music documentaries and such, it was really great to see this depiction of a musical, you know, rockumentary and everything. And I've seen similar things, things that are simply fictional and things that are non-fictional based on the format. But it was really great to kind of see this collaborative effort that isn't really fictional, but it isn't not fully non-fictional either, right? As you said, there are things that really did happen to you that really are affected, maybe happen to others you're around, or you know has happened before. But then there are also things that, you know, go with the character and go with the music and the mood and everything. And I think that is so important when it comes to any art form, but especially a film, especially a film based on a rock star, right? And I loved I do want to get to the music real quick too. You mentioned kind of, you really try to make the best singer-songwriter, you know, soundtrack of all time. And I feel like, you know, there's also a level where it's like, will there ever be a best of singer-songwriter soundtrack of all time? You know? and I think that's a very rhetorical question.
Totally.
But I also think it's a great direction to point yourself towards. And I have to say, like, I really enjoyed the kind of the rhyming style that you had in your songs. And I really enjoyed just kind of the way the songs took shape throughout the film. I felt like with the different cut scenes where, you know, one scene you're in the studio and you're singing, and next thing you know, maybe we have this beautiful landscape of outdoors, or maybe it's maybe you're doing something else in the film, but here you are still singing, and you go right back to the studio where you're just playing the piano and you're howling, and it's really important, right? And I feel like it kind of creates a different perspective towards the film and towards the story that you're trying to create, if that makes sense. I feel like it's not just a film anymore, and it's not just a story you're trying to tell, but it's you portraying a side of you, as you said, as My O'Malley is a lot braver than you would ever be, right? It's portraying a different side of you. So yeah, there are parts of it that are fictional. There are parts of it that are non-fictional. But I also think it's a great story to start telling for yourself as well. And so I'm looking forward to the book. I know Tarik and I are both looking forward to the book as you are able to really expand on more things and more personal things as well. And I feel that when it comes to what you were trying to depict, from what I've understood so far in the show, and also from what I just understood as a viewer, I feel like you did a terrific job. And as someone who is now reviewing the the film on the podcast, I will say it's a process, right? It is not going to hook you right away, but it is a great film, and you are going to go through a mix of emotions, and you are going to listen to different characters, and you're going to get different opinions on Maya. And then right close about the last 30 minutes, you really get to know Maya himself as Maya gets to know himself. And I think, and I told you this before the show, Justin, I think that is the most important part of the film, is because you get to know Maya, he gets to know himself, and then somehow, some way, you're kind of getting to know yourself at the same time.
I totally agree. And when you say about what's real and what's fake with it, like, I don't even know, because so much of it is relative to my own life, but some of it is satirical, but played even more real than the stuff that's real. So it's kind of a mishmash. You know, I'm kind of like having to play with, like, I don't know what's real or what's fake in life at all either. And, you know, in regards to the music, I think a lot of it had to be like, you know, there's parts of the song where it's almost like spoken word, you know, and it had to be so real that this isn't about like, hey, I'm trying to sing a song to impress you of me singing a song. It was more like being truth to like the narrative arc of that the song is helping to fill as it's going down. And one of the things, like with music as a musician, like I really haven't done any music videos, and the only reason I haven't is because it's fake, you know, like people are lip syncing. So there's something about in this film, you know, you talk about going to nature and then coming back to the studio, and there's something about a 3-act structure where you can like tell a story for a film, for a song, that means more because you see them doing it in real time, A, and B, it's in the context of a much larger scope. And I hope, and I've seen inklings of it, you know, we've seen like Beyonce with Lemonade and different, you know, artists trying to play around with like more of a different way of telling a story than just like a music video. But even those, they're all like lip sync, so it kind of takes me out of it. But I think there's so much potential now for music and story to intertwine in a way that supersedes how we normally ingest music. You know, like for me, I want to just, I don't know if I could ever do a music video unless I'm singing live on camera, because there's an inauthenticity or an element of it being sort of fake that it just doesn't resonate deep enough for me. So I think that was one of the credos of this whole thing, was make sure that this is so real that by the end, I don't even know what's real and fake. And here I am, the creator of it. I don't even know how much I even had to do with it. I did like so many roles, you know, writing, directing, producing, starring, all of it. But it's like, I don't even know how much I had to do with it. It was sort of like I was just a conduit to something much greater than I can even understand. And so it was even more important that I take my ego out of it and really like just act as a conduit to telling the best story in a different contextual light than just playing pretend, and really try to knock people in the gut in the same way that, you know, stories that are so real, like we've talked about documentaries, like they knock you in the gut because it's real. It's like, well, the golden age is real too, as much as any other film, narrative, or documentary is. I don't even know. It was more important to be so present every time in front of the camera that I can't even tell the difference. And I think that may be what we need now, because there's so much artifice that we can't tell the difference, and we're like entertaining ourselves to death with themes that don't really have any kind of like overlaying or lasting substance.
You know, I think you mentioned a good point earlier tied into what you just said. And, you know, this having this art that doesn't really have a whole lot of substance. And I think at the same time, you're in a society right now where things are so fast paced, things are constantly moving. As you mentioned earlier, right? And things are on such a short time span, right? It's like,
Quick.
okay, you have 5 seconds to tell your story.
Oh, yeah.
Go.
Yeah,
Wait,
exactly.
what? You're up. Next person.
I know. And I don't want to say this like in a way that like, oh, my ego or I'm ahead of the game, but I think the golden age is definitely ahead of, I don't want to say ahead of its time, but it's like, it's a little bit of in a genre, or it's in a day and age right now that's so fast that
Mhm.
it's like, I think it's in the wrong era a little bit. And I think this will catch up to people in a different way in which films normally do, just because we're so used to seeing things so sharp and quick and fast. And this takes you on a different journey. So I think as we begin to slow down as a culture, this will gravitate in the hearts and ears and eyes of different people in a different context. But like, I actually like that it's not in conjunction with like how stories are being told in that sharp fast pace, because
Mhm.
I think that's what we need more of, more than anything right now, is just to slow down and get back to our breath and take in a real story, a story that like you can't tell this quickly, and maybe we're all moving a little too fast these days. So I don't want to say it's ahead of its time, but it feels like it's in the wrong era of sorts, but that's okay. I really had to trust that this was the story that needed to be told for myself in the context and tone in which I did. And I think people will gravitate to it when they're looking to, and it might be confronting for a lot of people to reflectively take a peek at some of their own junk, their own wounds. It's not I've heard from some people that this is a hard to hot watch some of it, but I think that's what we need. I don't think we need just rosy stories anymore that are sharp and fast and quick and look slick. It's like sometimes it's good to look dirty and move slow and kind of sit in the muck to see how much we're doing that in our own life and how much we want to do it after the show wraps.
Mm-hmm. I feel that you know we're just in a point right now with society. Everything that has occurred over the past 5 to 10 years, and especially throughout the pandemic, we're at a point now where yes, things are fast paced, things are constantly moving, and I also feel like it's just gotten to the point where things are here and then gone. And I wouldn't even necessarily say fast, but just
Disposable.
Disposable. That's a great word. That's kind of what I was trying to find. Something that you could easily just kind of throw away as
Yeah.
if we cared for a few seconds and
I
then
know.
we don't, or if we ever really cared at all.
Oh yeah,
And,
never care.
and that's what's so ironic about art, especially film, is that in music and any type of art, really, we're not creating it so it can have 5 seconds in the spotlight, right?
Mhm.
We're not necessarily creating it for it to have any moments in the spotlight, but we're not creating it to only be, have a glance at for a little bit. We're creating it because it's art. It's something that's beautiful and creative and supposed to be timeless, right? And so again, no matter if you no matter if you made a film in the 1940s compared to making a film in 2021, or releasing an album in the 1960s compared to releasing an album in the 2010s, it doesn't matter. You're creating it for that lasting effect. You're creating it for that beauty of art and what it means to the artist that is releasing it and putting it out there in the world. And so with a film like The Golden Age, I think it's a perfect title for it as well, because it shows, and the ending to me is a great way to show, like, okay, here we are creating something that is kind of this golden color, right? But we're also creating this timeless thing, hence the age, right? And age sometimes can be referred to as something that is actually ending, right? It's kind of a construct of sorts. It's limited is the word I'm trying to find, but I feel like tied in with golden, it's no longer limited, but rather kind of given this ability to just expand.
Well, it's kind of like just to chime in on the golden age, it's a little bit of a double entendre. I think the golden age is sort of like the golden years of, like, we're looking back retrospectively at his past, but it's more in relation to some of the teachings from the East, We live in these different yugas. We're in like the fourth installment of human civilization, which is called Kali Yuga. And within Kali, and that's like the Iron Age, or the age of distraction, hence what we've talked about having things moving so fast, and etc. So the Golden Age, there's like a period within this yuga where people start readdressing how attached they are to their things, or seeing themselves beyond this material construct. So there's a golden age within it, which is like this age of enlightenment. And we see it in so many different contexts, from the 60s and 70s starting, like veganism, yoga, or people are starting to expand or think differently, et cetera. And it takes time. And now we're kind of moving into the forefront of this. So this period lasts for like thousands, like 10,000 years supposedly. And we're like at the precipice of it. That's kind of in relation to it. But it's also like, Maya's letting go of this old wound. Instead of like wallowing in it, he's looking to shed it in regards to his devotional path, to like circumvent it, or expand through it and past it through this golden age, or through devotion by the end of the film. So that's what it's really in reference to. And I think, if anything, when you were saying like it was like an ending, I almost think of it as like the opposite. It's like the golden age, we're like at the beginning of something, or at the beginning of our own healing process, the beginning of our own individual and collective devotional path. We're moving in a different construct where we have to address analyzing and letting go of these things that haven't served us before in this age of distraction. So that was kind of where it came from, in that regard, I guess.
I think the ending, I think I meant more of just like the ending of the film itself. But I do agree with you, though, that it's kind of, like I said, I think the last 20 to 30 minutes are by far my favorites of the film, because you are led on this journey of not only getting to know Maya, and Maya getting to know himself, but also kind of getting to know yourself in a way. And
sure.
And I think with any art, it's just great to be given a chance to do that, being able to learn something new. And so kind of going off of the film Golden Age, now you have a book coming out now as well called Memoir, A Day in the Lives. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So like I said, in a film, you got 100 minutes to tell people the story, and you can only get so intricately involved in some respect. The book has been a pound of flesh. And, I started doing it right nearing the release of it, and given that everything's streaming, I'm like, I should write a book with this. Because I felt like, even though I went through this whole journey of doing this film for like almost a decade, if not more, I felt like there was still more to tell, because I wasn't really getting honest in the way of this really long, expansive story of surviving a lot of trauma. And you can only get really in depth with that when you write like a book, so I've been working on that. I'm getting near the end of it, and it should be out probably this fall. But A Day in the Lives, it's, in reference to the Beatles' A Day in the Life, which is that long, song they have. And it was kind of like, homaging the Beatles, who got me through some very difficult times in my life, in the intro. And I basically tell the whole story. And what's funny in the film, it's like you see that the father's like the antagonist, where he was abusive and etc. But, I also had this crazy relationship with my mom too, which sometimes like both parents have their own thing. And I bless them and I forgive them both. And, they had a certain skill set. That generation was very concerned about the appearances of others, and they couldn't really get in touch with their emotions. And I think that's like apropos of a lot of our parents from that generation. So I tried in this book to like give a respectful dissertation of what I had been through, and showing my love and affection for them, even while I was punished by being their child, and as well as humorous stuff about, being in Hollywood and working at this nightclub while I was making my way, or managing an apartment building, like the chaos of like material life. But it all leads you, similar to the Golden Age, to, his devotional path, going to India and taking an initiation with the guru there. And so it's like, it's got a really sweet story to it, but I was able to tell more in a book than I ever could have in a film. And that's why I took it a little bit deeper. And I think people who are fans of the film will get a much deeper aspect with the book. Like the film is sort of like the macro version, a wide angle. And then, you go into the book and it's like, oh, whoa, there's so much more to Maya's story, so much more.
I do feel when it comes to, we've talked about it before, when it comes to a book, words are able to describe so much, right? Obviously, emotions and lighting and actions and everything can really describe a lot. But when it comes to a book, you're putting words on a page, in pages, right? And you're able to put so much into it. And to me, I actually find it as someone who likes to write and as a big reader as I am, I actually find it really fascinating that a book can include so much detail. You know, when we have books that are then made into films, a lot of people will kind of be like, well, why couldn't we put that huge detail into the film? It's like,
Oh my
because
God, totally.
it's like, here's the book, you know, and you're kind of seeing that the opposite way. Like, you created a film and then you're looking at, you know, reading the book and you're like, wow, I can do so much more in a book. And, you know, it's that same, just vice versa, where it's like, I can't do as much in a film that will necessarily relay the same way, but I can expand on this feeling more in the film, or I can expand on that storyline more in the film compared to the book, you know?
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who, like, when they read a book and then they see the film, they're always like, "Oh my God, the book was so better and the film was a piece of crap," because they were able to go so much deeper in the context of a book. But the reason why I think a book is important for a lot of audience members is they become almost like the director, the producer of the film in the book, in the sense that it allows your imagination to walk with the words and with the character and take a different journey than you would otherwise get by watching a film where I'm like kind of dictating where I want to lead you. And secondarily, the difference between A Day in the Lives and a lot of the books that are based on a film is this isn't told in like a 3-act structure that mirrors the Golden Age by any stretch of the imagination. It's a memoir of Maya O'Malley. And even more so than in the film, this alter ego was so important with the book because I really got like gangster real with the topics in the book that were way more real than they were in like the film. So it was even more paramount that I told this memoir of my life through Maya O'Malley, because it was way too confronting and painful and revealing to get into it. But so, you know, a lot of people that watch like Eat, Pray, Love, and they love the book, and then they watch the film like, oh, it was good, but it wasn't that good. So I'm not like doing a book like it's a 3-act structure. This is more like you're getting Maya's journal while on tour during his life as a musician, and you're getting like a deeper glimpse at like what was really going on outside the film itself. So it's more of an accompaniment than a reflective hue of a 3-act structure, which I thought was more interesting, because if you do a 3-act structure the way you go then shoot a film, it's like you're setting yourself up to go down, because 90% of the time, every book that you read is so much more viscerally potent than the film, because you as the reader are allowed to kind of be the director. You get to imagine what it's like while they're talking about it, whereas in the film it's more dictatorial. So I'll be curious how people respond to it. And I think it's a great accompaniment for those that enjoy the film. It allows them to go deeper, and I think it'll heal people even more than the film, just because of how reflectively honest it is, and there's a much more to the story than I could ever have felt in the Golden Age, if that makes sense. You know, when you're writing a memoir, you're getting really honest and saying, this is what happened. Whereas in a film, you're saying, these are glimpses. This is like a cliff notes of what happened. Now I'm like saying, okay, here we are. And sometimes I think it's good for people to read that, because it allows them a different intimacy than like having a director or producer kind of guide them where they want to go within, you know, a visual and audio, you know, perspective, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm really excited to read the book, and so we'll definitely try to get you back on. You know, later on when you do release that book, we can really dive into it like we have the Golden Age, and we can talk more. And you know, that's something that I was really happy to kind of talk to you about a little bit more about the book. When you said that you've been doing so much work on it and everything, I was hoping we could kind of talk about it, so that way could kind of see, you know, what's to come, especially with having watched the film now. It's you know, watching the film and kind of analyzing it in different ways, different views, lenses,
Sure.
and then being able to then read the book and kind of see, you know, the similarities, but also the differences. And it won't necessarily be, I don't believe it'll necessarily be like oh, let's review the book compared to the movie, because
Sure.
there really isn't. Yeah, there might be some comparison, as you said, but in reality, here you really get to put it all out there, right? A Day in the Lies is what it's called. If that doesn't speak for itself, then I don't know what does, you know? And
yeah, when you're going through this stuff, so having survived trauma, it's like, I thought it was a good title in relation to the Beatles reference, but it's more like you're living lies every day. You know what I mean? And it's more of an accompaniment. And I think that's why it will help serve people. But like we were talking about earlier about artistic mediums, it doesn't really matter whether it's acting or music or this or that or the other. It's like a book is just a way to tool into people's subconscious in a different way that you can do with a film. And I think it has more potency to heal sometimes, just because it gets out of the way of trying to dictate what you should feel, you know? And I went through the ringer, and there's just only so much you can tell in a film. And I didn't realize it until I wrote the book. But what's funny, what I want to say about how artistic mediums, whether it's an actor or writer, director, or editing a film or whatever, it's all different, but it's not different at all. Like editing the book, I have like a certain number of chapters, and I realize, oh, I like this chapter, I like this, but it's not really fitting with the context and structure of the book. In the same way, I have like oodles of footage with the film that never made the cut because it wasn't as strong enough to tell the story that needed to be told. And you don't realize that until the final stages. So that's the stage that I'm at with the book right now, is really getting honest about like, what's the through line? It's like, oh, he's healing through his devotional path. He's getting really honest about his wounds and telling some intersperses of what he had to go through while going through all that. So it's like the editing of scenes in a film. It's very comparable to a book. It's so much more laborious with words because you have to get really articulate and specific, and you can't leave any fat in the same way you really can't in a film, but you can get away with like leaving a little bit here and there. With a book, it's like you really have to be uberly concise, because if you keep leaving a piece of fat or something that's not helping to serve the piece of that 3-act structure within the chapter, let alone the chapters within the book, it can detract the audience from not staying with you. So I'm being very cognizant and present with that in the same way I did with the film, but it's a different beast, even though it's the exact same process, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. I have to say thank you, Justin, for coming on to the show and talking to us about about the Golden Age. By the way, check it out on Amazon Prime. Check it out. It really is great. If you're worried about time, it's not that long, but it's a great film, and there's so much to it. And it's got so much depth, and I feel that I was taken on a journey, and I hope that you are too when you watch it. So definitely, all of our listeners, our viewers, please give it a chance and go watch it. It's a great film. Of course, The Golden Age by Justin Connor. Of course, check out his book, released most likely later this year, A Day in the Lives, a memoir, also written by Justin Connor. Very excited for that. We'll definitely be talking about it here on the Identity Podcast. But Tarik, do you have anything else to add?
I think he froze up.
Yep, I think we're going to take that as a no.
Thank you guys for watching and allowing to hate you, and you guys really responded to it in a sweet way. So thank you.
Well, again, thank you for giving us a chance to give you, give this film a platform and to be able to talk about it, and allowing Tarik and I to continue to add new lenses to who we are as people, and being able to just kind of, continue to learn from art and the beauty of art, right? It's so vast and so beautiful. And so thank you for that. We greatly appreciate it. But once again, you've been listening and watching the Identity Podcast. The Identity Podcast, we're so grateful for you as always. Every single Wednesday, don't forget, you can check us out at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And of course, on Thursdays, we have our podcast that goes live on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Of course, don't forget to follow us on social media at The Identity Podcast, and check us out on all streaming platforms. And you can, if you love The Identity Podcast and want to sponsor us, well, guess what? You can. All you have to do is email us at press@findyourdnyc.com, and we'll get back to you with more details. Of course, don't forget to subscribe to our Patreon page and our Discord page. Both of those links are in all of our bios on all of our social media pages via our link tree. And of course, don't forget to check out our link tree, because that's where it contains all of our essentials for the show. So do not miss out. Check it out. There's lots of exciting stuff out there right now and coming to you soon for the Identity Podcast. Of course, this has been the Silver Screen featuring Justin Connor. Thank you again, Justin, for coming on. We're really grateful to have you. It's been a great discussion. I feel like I've learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. It's so sweet to meet you.
Well, it's been great to have you. And of course, as always, thank you for listening and watching the Identity Podcast. Next week, July 7th, we enter a new month. We're just a month away from our 1-year anniversary of the Identity Podcast. It's crazy to think it's come this far, but we're so excited. So check out July 7th, The Healing Power of Words, featuring author and poet Tatiana Denford. Very excited to have her on, based out of New York. Just an incredible person. Really excited to be able to talk about her story with words and writing as well. Again, you've been listening, watching the Identity Podcast. Thanks as always. I'm Caleb, one of your co-hosts, along with my fellow and lovely co-host, Tarik. We're so grateful to have you. We'll catch you next week. Thanks.
Ivy Rivera, psychic medium, and this is episode number 10 of Living in Truth, Short Stories, Time Travel. One of the most common questions I get asked is whether or not I believe time travel is possible, and if so, how frequently are we doing it? My answer to this is yes. I absolutely believe that time travel is possible. I also believe we're doing it far more frequently than we realize. There are about 6 different aspects that I look at when examining time travel and whether or not it's happening, but today we have time to talk about 3. So I want to focus on deja vus, dreams and astral travel, and hopes and aspirations. When I think about retrocausality quantum theory, I think about these 3 areas the most. Let's start with deja vus. We love to talk about deja vus like it's something hokey and it's something that gives us chills. It makes us feel like there's some truth in it, some mystery in it. But it's really much more than that. Deja vus typically tend to be time travel. This idea that we've already been to the future and that when we're living in the future, we are tapping into our past. And when we're in our present, we have these alternate realities going on at all times. So by my definition, a deja vu is like a reconnection, a revisitation of something that has occurred. And this is why when we have one, it may come with goosebumps or almost like a trance-like state. These are things that notify us physically that we are in an honest moment of truth. Not only that it's actually real, even though it would prove logically to be otherwise, but also that it's significant, whether it be experiencing something in the future years before it will ever occur in real time, or it be a flashback from the past, or a reconnection with a person or a situation that you've had on another plane, maybe through astral travel or while you were asleep. That level of significance has everything to do with our life contract. The reason we came to Earth, the lessons that we have to learn, the work that we have to do. This is one of the reasons a lot of deja vus occur when we encounter someone for the first time who we actually have connection with, whether it be from past lives or we have what astrologers would call North Node connection, meaning that we have a lot of work to do in the future, possibly even in future lives. So deja vus are a significant reenactment of an event that has already occurred, and it signifies that there is truth in this event, even though it defies logic, and that it is really important we pay attention and participate in the way that we should to maximize our lessons, our growth, our prosperity. One of the other areas I like to look at that I'm not going to be able to get into today is past life flashbacks and trance-like states into these regressions, where we can also access that information, but it is very similar to the deja vu theory. Let's talk about dreams and astral travel. In my dreams class, I talk about the 3 different kinds of dreaming: subconscious, visit, and vision, aka prophecy. So it's mostly with prophetic dreaming and astral travel that I see time travel. We've all had a dream when we were a child that took maybe 10, 20, even 30 years to occur. And when it did finally happen in real time, our worlds came together and it was this dynamic aha moment of connectivity. Now, vision dreams or prophecy tend to be a lot more dramatic. They are far more ingrained in one's memory than astral travel may be. The dynamic nature of the event is, I believe, what causes that to happen. And the fact that so much prophecy comes with a warning about something really traumatic or tragic that may or may not occur, it has a sense of urgency about it, and it remains like an imprint in our memory that we can never shake. Every time we revisit it, it's as though it's happening in real time. And that's not to say that everyone who has a vision dream about something that may or may not occur in the future should go and tell that person. We stick to a strong code of ethics. Here at the Ivy League Psychic Academy, I train my students deeply in discernment. Astral travel is essentially leaving your body and traveling to other dimensions to get work done, whether it be for your own life contract or assisting in the world around you. People, of course, use it for other reasons. People do it voluntarily and involuntarily, but that's the purpose of this focus for today, is on the time travel aspect. Let's talk about hopes and aspirations. I wanted to include this one today because I think this is the most overlooked and least discussed. We tend to think of things like time travel as being some far off notion, when in actuality, it's connected to our life path and we should be embracing it every time we think we've seen it. And this is my favorite theory connected to retrocausality, is that the things that we want, the goals that we set, the dreams that we have for our future is actually something we're meant to do. It's something we feel in our bones, in our gut, in our soul, that we must lean toward, accomplish, achieve, because in actuality, it's already been done, or it is at the very least a possibility in the future. And even when they seem really big or unattainable, or too many blocks and obstacles have been put in your way over the course of life, it doesn't mean that you can't achieve it. It is literally within arm's reach for you. And this is so important when people look at their purpose. I am constantly telling my clients to think back to what you wanted to do when you were a child, what you passionately knew you were supposed to do when you were a teenager, before society and teachers and student loans and all kinds of other objectives came in to distract you from the truth. So the things that you're drawn to have a purpose. We want what we're meant to have. So this was a fun topic. I hope this helped a little bit to get you guys on path with a couple key areas that you can look at: deja vus, prophecy dreams, astral travel, and your own personal hopes and aspirations. This topic always sparks some interesting dialogue, so feel free to comment, please, and leave any requests that you may have for upcoming short stories. If you're interested in joining classes at my Ivy League Psychic Academy, or you want to book a reading or an event with me, you can check out the links in my bio. Donations are always appreciated here, and if you enjoyed this, please do subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.